In terms of climate change, when we talk about this entire history of what climate change can really do, there is a lot of movement that a lot of students are doing. We talk about experiential learning, we talk about the joy of learning, and we focus on many aspects of the language classroom really that deal with it. I had thought of asking and inquiring with you all in terms of is there one literacy, but I think that debate has been kind of pushed in by both Dr. Relango and Dr. Hariharan. So I'm not going to start off with those focus features. What I'm going to start is by talking about why and how we can use climate change as content in the classroom, environment overall as content in the classroom, and how we can create interest in the students, but also enable them to use a task-based learning approach style in order to both focus on activities that they will have and to focus on, uh, feeling a sense of making a difference, to be able to come up with problem-solving issues, to be able to come up with enabling them to come up with activities where they are able to solve problems and critically think and collaborate with each other and in the process learn language. So the next slide, the third slide actually, because I'm skipping this, is actually taking off from those points that Dr. Lango and Hariharan had made. So primarily, if you look at Freire, and he talks about what literacy research and practice seems to really focus on and really do is ignore the social and ideological evidence of what literate behavior should be like and how it is visible in culture. That is where our foci should be on. And this is where experiential learning, this is what NEP 2020 talks about as making holistic learning outcomes, competencies that need to be built in and to be enabled and activated. So those are elements and areas that we need to be focusing upon in terms of climate change. How can this help? Why should this be a concern for us? So the next slide really focuses on these elements where we are looking through as what are the key aspects of what critical literacy really deals with. This is a component in what Dr. Lango was talking about is we need to make people and the students think that they are actively engaged in trying to solve problems, to deal with issues that affect them. And the critical literacy primarily is focused upon these elements of, how can I cover a topic, where can there be transformative, or how can I contribute to transformative change, and what can I do? So we'll come back to maybe the slide in terms of the effect, but typically what we focus upon is to go into another, take up an issue and try and see how we can build on it. So since there was a speech on, what we are doing with the kind of content that we have, Dr. Lango said, should we have the textbook? And that's a question that all of us have. Should we have the textbook? Is that really necessary for us? Critical literacy should be a topic that gets covered. It's a unit that, it's not just a unit that is to be covered. Environment can lend us a lot of thematic areas that really focus on getting students to think about how they can solve problems, what they can do with it, write to and be activist in terms of writing to their counselors, finding research areas, and becoming more aware and alert about even making their own environment and conscious really much more safer, but also becoming more aware and alert about global issues that come in, right? So for instance, when we talk about the Ukraine crisis, there is a wonderful website, and can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So there's a wonderful resources that you will find that really talk about how we can use environmental goals and in various ways, not just environment, also all kinds of SDG goals. This is content-based learning, but a lot of SDG goals that really come in there. I would have typically taken you to the website that is depicted out here in the slides. The slides are available now to all of you all, and you could look at some of them. But there are multiple lesson plans that really focus on what is language teaching. I would throw light on the fact that we are focusing on, you know, teacher, who is a teacher? And some of my favorite lines of what and how a teacher is defined is also enshrined in this book, because Alan Mary really talks about the fact that, who is a teacher? And there's a conversation that he narrates. What do you do? I'm a teacher. What do you teach? People. What do you teach them? English. You mean grammar, verbs, nouns, pronunciation, conjugation, articles and particles and negatives and interrogatives. That too. What do you mean that too? Well, I also try to teach them how to think and feel and show them inspiration, aspiration, cooperation, participation, consolation, innovation. Help them think about globalization, exploitation, confrontation, incarceration, discrimination, degradation, subjugation, how inequality brings poverty, how intolerance brings violence, how need is denied by greed, how isms become prisons, how thinking and feeling can bring about healing. Well, I don't know about that. Maybe you should stick to language, forget about anguish. You can't change the world, but if I did, I would be a cheater, not a teacher. And this fundamentally states why we need to be concerned about what we are teaching in the classroom, not just language elements, but um, what are the issues that our students have to deal with? How do they have to deal with it? What is it about those issues that should make us more aware and alert that comes in? Those are aspects why we are talking about content-based learning really in this seminar, and why we think that it should be the focus area of how we bring in these things. The book itself on the right, which is where this poem is there as a foreword from Alan Maley, is by Nick Peachy and Alan Maley, and has many resources and lesson plans at different grade levels that enable you to focus on activities. The next slide really takes us to another kind of a resource that comes through, but these are memes, and if you go online and on the internet, there are multiple memes that talk about climate change. Now, how can I use them? And since we are talking about content, how can I use all of this in my classroom at different grade levels? Students, especially college students, but anyone who is above the 8th grade and actually the 6th grade nowadays, has access to Instagram account, is looking at Facebook and focusing on various issues. If they don't have it themselves, they know of someone who has it. And they have access, if they have access to a smartphone, they love making memes. They love creating content which has pictorial representation, and then having a smart Alex comment about it. Now, can we teach them more about how language is to be used while they're also creating something that they find fun and engaging and relevant to them? So this is a basic way where you could teach them figures of speech. You can ask them to create figures of speech instead of only recognizing figures of speech. Climax, anticlimax, puns. These are things that they have fun creating, and much more than learning. And if we can create and make them producers of language, not just consumers, where they are learning and then looking at comprehension. So there will be comprehension that they have, but then there is an application that they need to create based on that. So these kinds of works that come through online, in internet, and getting activities and changing assessments that Dr. Hariharan spoke about in his chair's address, that we need to also change the way we are assessing. And can we create something where we're saying, what is the kind of caption that you can give this? What's the kind of meme content that you can have? Uh, can you identify the picture that would be a counterproductive, countering this? Of course, we can do this with multiple other activities. It doesn't have to be environment as content. However, environment is a concern for the students. They realize, and they must be made to realize if they don't already realize, how important content is for the students, for their lives, for their future, for this planet. And through these activities of enabling them to create memes, it could be even non-digital. This is a digital medium, but you could also have non-digital where they have pictures and they create captions, smart alike captions, which have metaphorical representation and have analogy in them, and they could be focused upon. There is another, the next slide really talks about another point. Again, the next slide, where we constantly map our competencies and objectives and outcomes such that we constantly focus on ensuring that there is a competency that they are building in. So if I have a meme activity and I do the meme activity, I need to understand what are the competencies that my students should have had. They should have understood something. For instance, the earlier slide, the smoking kills because it's good for the environment because it kills humans, is definitely punning, is playing with the fact that smoking kills. They have understood that. They need to understand how humans are, disabling the environment. So how can I do this? How can I say that you have actually understood it? It's not just a clever phrase of turn of words. We ask them to present the meme and explain. So in advertising industry, this is what happens. Students are, I mean, not just students, but whoever has designed the graphic is supposed to be able to come and present to them the concept that they have. These are the kinds of questions that are asked to someone who's presenting the concept. Why do you say this word? Why do you use this word? Why couldn't a synonym be used? Why have you used this color? Why have you used this exclamation mark? Why have you stated these words in this order of phrasing? For instance, why have you started off with smoking kills or smoking is good for the environment because it kills humans? Why have you started with smoking? Why couldn't you say smoking kills humans? Um, Next, it's good for the environment. Why could you not state it in that manner? And when students have to defend this, they are definitely trying to understand and they will notice the structure of language. So if we are able to create those opportunities where their assessments are slightly changed and nuanced, such that they are able to specifically explain why they used a certain construction, we are building in them the objectives which are really and the outcomes which are really a learning goalpost of how to use language. There is another point that we are building in them, a competency to be able to defend, to be able to argue, to be able to research and present communication. So it can't just be that smoking kills humans, uh, because they need to be able to tell me how can you deduce that smoking killed humans? And if this were something that a company were taking up and had to present, they would be asking those questions. Can you really claim this? Will we face a legal action and a lawsuit because of this? And the student has to be able to say that, no, I know because there is this data from United States, UNFCCC, that says how much smoking kills humans. There is a World Health Organization that tells us how much smoking kills humans and what smoking does to environment. So it is a pun on the fact that smoking humans if they die. And this is what human degradation of environment has done. These are the statistics. So they should be able to defend with all of this. That means I'm building in them a competency for research skill for them to have defended. That one singular meme can lead to multiple other activities that they should have done in order to be able to defend that meme. That kind of activity really energizes students. There is a lot of reading that they are doing. We are also going to authentic sources, because one of the questions that we ask them in their defense is, what is the kind of sources that you've gone to? Do I have to always conduct it as a viva? No. If I had a checklist and a rubric that came with the meme, I could actually ask them, tell us why, tell us all the data points that enable you to understand that this is important. Tell us all the data point sets that help you to figure out the explanation of the data, of why every word of yours counts. Why do you think the structure is there? And they could write it out as well. And that enables them to build a competency in terms of, how do you know that your data is authentic? What kind of skill comes in? And these enable them to think about something that's relevant, and also to say why I should always have research at the back of what I'm saying. So environmental, something, and it can be with anything really, but these are elements that come through. Is the voice quality better? I just wanted to check, Agya. All right.
Yes, it is better now.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Let me just try this. So going on forward, thanks for that. And going forward in terms of the competencies, what else can I do with my language teaching? The next slide. Yeah. How the next one. Yeah, mapping competencies. So I may be asking you to switch back and forth. So sorry. Yeah. So in terms of the competencies of dimensions of wherever the global awareness is, if we are able to deal with mapping competencies and connecting it to the real world, activities of environment, uh, students have found it interesting. So if you're talking about, say, the Ukraine crisis, typically, students can go to something that I have given certain links. Anyway, Lego as a company was something that for the longest time, since 1980s, had association with Shell, the oil company that really that does a lot of work around the world for oil fracking. But it had got into a lot of trouble. Shell has got into a lot of trouble for the amount of oil spillage that they had in the oceans. Now, this is how tester power works. This is how children can be also targets of, making a change and making a difference. Greenpeace specifically targeted Lego as one of the partners of Shell, uh, and said that you must think about what you are talking and teaching children. And this is the kind of activity they had. They used these toys. Actually, you can see on the screen, this is a 2014 article that's there on the right side. But they used Lego toys in petrol pumps, outside petrol pumps of Shell, with protest marches saying that we want a safer, cleaner environment. And parents who were concerned about their children, and children who were concerned about what is happening to the climate, and whales are dying and dolphins are dying, all stood up together to also be a part of signatories of what the Greenpeace was doing. And there were many letters that many school children wrote across the country of USA to the president or the governor that they were writing to, and to Shell Company and to Lego Company. They wrote to all of these, um, addressees. And Lego finally took a stand. It said that my base is, the children, their future. And you have children writing letters to Lego saying, we need to protect our future. We have talked about Greta Thunberg and all of them, but this was even prior to that, where children just wrote letters as part of school activities and said, this is how I want to protect the environment. I've heard about the fact that, oil spillages happened. I saw it in the news. I saw how birds were, suffering. They were getting fish that was not really good. and how dolphins and whales were suffering because of oil spillage, and don't like this, and you need to do something about it. Some of these letters were very simple words because they were second standard and first standard students. Some of these letters were at eighth standard that had a lot more details, had more fraction, more what you call statistics in them. And Lego finally took action. Of course, Greenpeace as an activist organization did its work, but children around the country also rallied around. And Lego finally decided in 2014, in October, it announced that a very long association that it has with a key funder. Shell was a funder, was a partner, a collaborator in Lego. That partnership will be broken. And Shell, in the meantime, with this kind of a pressure, is committed that it will try and protect the environment, and its oil fracking would have certain would follow stringent UNFCCC requirements, and that it would replant trees, and it would contribute to cleaning up of all the oil spillage around the world, and it would set up an R&D plant in order to see what can be done about oil spillages. And they are involved in a lot of activities. They're invested in a lot of activities of oil spillage. One of the activities is about how which kind of mushroom can clean up a lot of oil spillage, because they've been working on that. They've also been working on what kind of algae can absorb oil spillage and ensure that it doesn't spread to other parts. There is a lot of research that is being done, but a lot of this came about because students became activists of different kinds. So those are elements that focus on what activism can do. We have a lot of activities that focus upon from these elements that work on where these actions come from. There are many other stories that you can find of what students could do. In order to do all of this, students had to research. So many of the things that the teachers did, they're researching. So they were doing letter writing, which is a part of our syllabus, but they were doing it from an activist angle. They read the story, they played Lego, they also read more stories of what other letters were written. They also used quite a bit in terms of um, what other children were looking at, and then try to see where this environment village was happening. So there was a lot of science that was also being taught. There was a lot of history and geography and activities of what could be done was being taught, but there was also English that, of course, led to a lot of extent. They created posters and pamphlets, and students actually just, depicted them, college students as well, where they had protest marches, but also there were these activities where students were creating posters, and all that they did is not go to the street, but have a protest picture clicked and then sent that along to the company so people could see a visual dimension. These were activism stories that really helped in making a change, one. But there was also a study that was done um, on some students, and this was basically a teacher writing about her experiences of teaching students through this. That was a research paper. It's a blog more than a research. It's a research blog where she shares this information about how her students were the most active and most concerned about correcting their spellings and most concerned about trying to ensure that their sentence structures were right. And they looked up dictionaries to find the best vocabulary that they could to express themselves. And it showed in the way that it transferred to the way that they were studying everything else in English in that year. Their comprehension enhanced in a sense because they were reading research with a critical eye to make a difference. They learned to focus better, to skim and scan better, and they learned to differentiate. This was a key point that she said. My students learned, and this was for a sixth grade teacher, my students learned to differentiate between opinion and fact on their own. They could look at a sentence and say, this I cannot quote as my research status. This is an opinion. It doesn't have fact. And it was a great literacy movement for it. And she said that that skill through that movement and that active learning of one incident enabled them to transfer their skills to the rest of all the other content that she was, of course, teaching through the year. And that is a story of why we could use things of uh, what excites students and what is interesting to students, and where students feel they can make a difference, and why environment, therefore, could be a content for the classroom. Not the only, but definitely as a thematic that comes through. The felling of the banyan tree is just one of the examples. We do this in different colleges, of course. We also do this in different schools. I mean, the ninth standard NCRT textbook has The Felling of the Banyan Tree by Dilip Chitre. And we, of course, do this in college. We study Felling of the Banyan Tree at times in anthologies or in literature. And you can also do this in lower grades with any other poem. But the fact is that doesn't have to be just about letter submission or activity or creating a poster or those activities which are traditionally recognized as only language activities. We can take up literature environment in terms of activism or poems such as these and see what else as activities could be constructed. There are various resources that are there. Um, when we talk of felling of the banyan tree, uh, what kinds of activities can be created around this? Of course, we teach. We teach the poem. Uh, but can we also have assessment? Will go beyond understanding the impact of the poem, but also getting the students to think about more critical, cultural uh, connects to what this poem is really speaking about and connect it to how the environment is required to be safeguarded and ask them, can they write a poem on trees themselves? Can they, this was what Dr. Hariharan had spoken about, that they could write on, taking a daffodil and then taking up and replacing that with some other tree, but not really replacing, but can they connect to what is happening around them because trees get shaved off or cut quite often? Can they think about can they do a research study on what are the kinds of birds and animals that frequent one tree in their neighborhood? And then what can be done to protect that tree? Or is that tree ever going to be in danger? What could be the kinds of elements that could endanger it? That is for a lower grade, but the higher grades can actually talk about. And we did this in Bombay, where one of the colleges, where this was one of the poems. The activity was on mangroves connected to the poem, and they had to look at how to protest and protect the mangrove plantations. This was during the time of RA Colony being being one of the places for the train hubs, and the teachers had connected it, felling of the banyan tree in that college, to looking at what could be done in environmental activism. And many of the students connected so well with the immediate repercussions of what was happening and realizing what could happen to flamingos and what could happen to the birds in the RML colony and in mangrove plantations around, because there are multiple threats to environment anywhere in the vicinity. And they connected it to the tree, and then they talked about how that person would feel and how they themselves felt. And they were able to take up the metaphor of the father and talk about what industrialization and growth and development means. So they were able to level up from there. And that's something that you could deal with in a literature classroom also, because this literature is not just supposed to be teaching them to appreciate the poem for only the structure. Of course, that is very important. Of course, the emotions are important, but it's also about the resonance of why that, what is the singular element that comes in from here that resonates. So, for instance, when he talks about these lines, where he says that we left Baroda for Bombay, where there are no trees except the one which grows and seeds in one's dreams, its aerial roots looking for the ground to strike. Uh, Students created an entire blog, which is a private blog, but they created blog posts on how they felt seething about plants and trees and environment around them and pollution very high that had seeped up very high and how they would feel about it. And use these lines to talk about what it meant to talk about growing and seething, because what does the word seeth really mean? And that was where their point was coming from. And so they understood and nuanced and engaged with the text and tried to understand the meaning really and focused on those elements. These are some examples of what can be done. There are many other examples and many other evidences that come in. The next slide, there is a list of resources that I have actually collated. Um, and I started off by saying ELT Footprints, because ELT Footprints is both a Facebook group if you really want to join it. It is also the last blog, the last link actually. And it is also something that has a list of resources should you want to use how to teach. It has a list of resources with lesson plans for different grade levels that focus around. They also are looking for active collaborators. Constantly, you can reach out, join the group, and share your own lesson plans and your own contextualized ideas. Um, Much of this is right now in more a Eurocentric manner, so it would be great to have more Indian and rural and local voices being heard. There is another where also you have a lot of teaching resources. The third link, which is actually teaching English from the British Council, it has a lot of stories of climate action and also all kinds of education resources at all grade levels, from kindergarten to college, that you could use. I will say again, many of this is Eurocentric, so it will be great to have activities, but for you to tweak them and then again, write back with saying this is what an activity could be, or these are the poems, or these are the short stories, or these are the activities that really help language teaching in the classroom. Um, Once you deal with environment, there is so much of content in the environment. All genres actually fit into environment. There is statistics, there is research that has to be done, there are stories that are told, there is a collection of stories. I have given just a link of what had been recommended as some of the best stories from India by women on environment. But it is not just women, but also children and other people. There are comic novels that are being written. There is something that I have given as the second last link, which is green humor. And the artist really takes on environment and has multiple books that can be written, but there are also some of this is absolutely open and available for, it's on Instagram and on his website for us to use and rethink the modalities of what we are trying to teach and how also teaches them presentation skills. So he takes very complex statistical data and then presents them as a humorous cartoon. But, like the Ukraine crisis or the world crisis or anything, it tells students presentation skills. It tells them how to use multimodality, how to use pictures and text together, and how to be very succinct in presenting one's ideas. Uh, so those are the kinds of activities that language classroom could have. I did, and I wonder if I could ask, Bhagya, can you click on Gapminder? It is the third last link, and I promise not to make you do too much. But it is just from the fact that Gapminder is a resource that I like for the way that it enables us to present information and research, and can be used in classrooms to ask students to deal with data and then be able to talk about it and present it effectively. So they research, they find information and go on. This is the site. If you click on the link that is called resources, um, I would have typically shown this to you, but this would be easier. So what you see out here in terms of resources is absolutely free and absolutely, something that you can use. And it's also got offline functions. Students anywhere above sixth standard can go here. They collect a lot of data from the World Bank and governments and all of it. And they have a lot of frameworks on how they can use, for instance, income levels, population services. And some of these concerns that are coming in is also about, environment. So there is a lot of data and statistics that they can have of environment. What you see on the right side of the screen, that thank you, Bhagya, for pausing here, but on the right side of the screen is something that's called a dollar street, where different families, are depicted. What bed they sleep on, what toothbrush they use, how they dry their clothes, how their kitchen is organized. Everything you can actually see in the dollar street. And it is organized across countries, 66 countries, 449 homes. Actually, not a very large data sample again, but it helps students visualize this. Now, why am I talking about this as an activity or as a resource? One, this is a resource that enables you to see a family's life. It also tells us a lot about, as a resource when we are using it, about who seems to be closer to nature. So obviously, you're able to now visually see that across countries, irrespective of whether they are developed or developing or underdeveloped, the poor seem to be using a lot of natural materials. They seem to be using materials of, leaves and bamboo shoots and stuff like that. And the rich seem to be living in more steel and concrete localities. Then asking ourselves, if climate change occurs, is that going to add to inequities? Is it going to create it? This becomes a visual representation. And it also helps them understand how they can themselves present their research and representation. It becomes great content. There is a lot of materials and stories that each of the family also says. For instance, toothbrush. The toothbrush, as you go down the income level, very often becomes a bark or a stem, like a neem stem. And not just in India, but across Asia, across Africa, across a lot of Europe, it is basically using the bark to, kind of clean your teeth. And there they also have videos sometimes talking about how that is useful. So these become content that can be triggering students to ask more questions in terms of how they can wonder what they can learn and how they can act and talk about inequities. It will also, through all of these exercises, make them think about language use. Yeah, Charu.
So it was a very, very informative and intriguing talk that you gave. And incidentally, I was working on a paper recently on environment and education. And so your presentation today came to me as a kind of godsend where I could take so many things. And yes, I think that is the need of the hour, because we need to sensitize the students. And yes, language can be a way where we have possibilities of using different kinds of resources, different kinds of materials, because most of the other classrooms are restricted. They have to teach the content, but in language teaching, we can explore and bring in content from diverse fields. So I would just like to compliment you, first of all, on such an informative talk. My only concern a little bit here is, are there some materials which are open source materials and which can be downloaded and used in classrooms? Because sometimes materials which are there, they are not open source materials. So could you be able to clarify
So,
on that?
so both, yeah. So the two links that I specifically mentioned in the PPT, and you have access to it, so you can
Yes, ma'am.
store it.
Mm.
Teachingenglish.org.uk is from British Council. Those are under the CC by rights. They are actually usable and reusable and tweakable and all of it. And ELT Footprints, the other thing that I said, is also committed to making it usable, free resources that you can use. In fact, they welcome contributions from everyone to
Yes.
also add to the pool. So
Mm.
both of those sites are actually just free resources. Um, there is quite a few, but here you will find a plethora of very much consolidated resources across grade levels and activities. So yes.
Yes, and I think, yes, we can definitely adapt poems and all from our own contexts to make them
Yes,
sensitized.
yes.
And
Activities are absolutely there. And some of it is not even the fact that there has to be an activity. Like, for instance, when I was talking about the Lego story, it was something that people had just created. And we all do letter
mm,
writing and activism there,
yes,
but also poster creations and memes, but also just trying to get them to think about how they use different
exactly.